It's 10 a.m. on the dot, and indeed a very good morning to everyone. It's a beautiful sunny day in Maseru. For those that are in Maseru, let me welcome everyone to the Lesotho webinar on regional cross-border toolkit. This toolkit that has been developed by the USA Trade and Investment Hub. It's an easy step-by-step guide for persons or for entities in the region who are interested in exporting to the South Africa market. And the cross-border toolkit covers areas such as export procedures. It covers areas such as contracts for international sale of goods. It covers areas such as Incoterms and payment methods, among other things. So I'm looking forward to a great interactive webinar this morning. My name is Marina Mapitso Bizabani. I am the Lesotho country representative for the USAID Trade and Investment Hub. Once again, let me extend a warm welcome to everyone this morning, also with acknowledgement of our U.S. Embassy representative, Erica Lewis, who is joining us this morning, as well as the Director of Trade, Meme Rimutebang, who's also joined us this morning. Before we proceed, let me just highlight a few house rules that will help us to go through the session with little or no hiccups, technological hiccups. If we could just have everyone on mute throughout, unless when during the question and answer sessions where you can raise your hand and you will be called forth to ask a question or to make a comment. Secondly, if we may also have our videos off so that we only have the person that is presenting or the person that will be asking a question during the question and answer session who will have their camera on. So if we can just switch off our videos. And then lastly, if we can post our comments and questions in the chat box during the presentations. These will be answered at a later stage during the Q&A session, the question and answer session. Without any further ado, allow me to introduce Mr. George Makore. Ntate George Makore is the Deputy Chief of Party of the USA Trade and Investment Hub. He's going to give us an overview of the USAID Trade and Investment Hub activities, as well as the key objective. Ntate George is a development professional with over 25 years of experience, mainly in the SADC region. He has worked on programs aimed at enhancing regional integration and strengthening the Southern Africa's regional competitiveness in roles focusing on trade, issues of investment, policy, and communication. He's currently the Deputy Chief of Party of the USA Trade and Investment Hub, as I have just highlighted, and his past work experience within the USA Trade and Investment Hub includes being Director of AGOA and Export Competitiveness, as well as Director of Enabling Environment. I've had the joy of working with him on the Lesotho Investor Roadmap some years ago, with its subsequent audits to make an input into improvement of Lesotho's investment climate. Ntate George, let me welcome you up on stage to take us through an overview of the USA Trade and Investment Hub activities.
Thank you very much, Marina. Good morning, colleagues. I think I know quite a number of, I recognize quite a number of names here, with Lesotho being, I can safely say, I can consider it to be my second home, following the number of visits that I've made to Lesotho over the years. I just wanted to share with us here, those that are joining us for the first time, what the USAID Trade and Investment Hub, or USAID Trade Hub, is all about. We are a project that has been in existence since October 2016, and we are a 6-year project, so our lifespan is getting towards the end. The project is due to end at the end of September 2022. The reason, to a great extent, why we are doing this is to make sure that by the time the project ends, it's one of our sustainability plan. We want to make sure that we will leave you exporters with tools that you can actually use going forward without having to rely on us. So this is one of our strategies to get you to have this, understand this tool, and we will share the tool with you so that you can be able to use it without our involvement. So we, in addition to the objectives that I'm going to highlight here, I just wanted also to just inform us here that while we operate in the SADC region, we only cover 9 out of the 16 SADC countries, and the 9 countries are Lesotho, where we are today, Eswatini, Botswana, Namibia, South Africa. Those are the SADC countries, and then in addition to that, we have Angola, Malawi, Mozambique, and Zambia as the 9 countries that the project covers. And what do we do in those countries? The objective or our mandate is to work with companies in the first mandate, which is our first objective, work with countries, the 9 countries, 8 of the 9 countries that I've just highlighted, in terms of identifying firms that would want to export their products to South Africa. So we're looking at products in 8 of the 9 countries, companies that are producing those products. In this case, we're looking at Lesotho's products that can be exported to South Africa, and we try and assist the companies that do export or would like to export to find buyers in South Africa for their products. And there are a number of ways that we do that. We help with linking up the producers with potential buyers by first identifying where the demand is. The rationale behind this is that we realize that South Africa is a big market, considering the number of people there, almost 60 million people. And then for Lesotho, it's even more telling because of the fact that Lesotho is within South Africa itself. And it's important to then use or identify markets in South Africa. We also assist with capacity building, such as this. We also, such as this, the event we are here for today. We also assist with competitiveness in terms of assisting firms with certifications and product testing, so that they can the products can be more competitive. South Africa, being a huge market, it also has it's also highly technologically advanced, and sometimes requires raw materials for further processing for export to other parts of the world, including the US. The second part of our mandate or objective is to help the same companies that will be looking at exporting to help with capital or technology from South Africa, so that they can then be able to improve their capacity for production, as well as have more products being exported. And in this case, we identify who'd be investors, those that are interested in extending their footprint into the 8 countries that I mentioned, including Lesotho, and we get them to link them up with would be investees or companies that will be looking for funding or technology. Then the third objective is it involves all the 9 countries that we work in, and this is in line with increasing utilization of the African Growth and Opportunity Act program. And the idea again is to work with companies that are near export ready or that are ready to export, and we identify products within the 6,400 product lines that are GO eligible, and assist companies to identify buyers in the US and assist also with market entry requirements, such as getting the certifications that are required, and also to be able to overcome any regulations that might stop the companies from exporting. So that's the role that we play. And like I indicated earlier, today's session is actually aimed at assisting companies to be able to navigate the export requirements into South Africa from Lesotho. In addition to our 3 main objectives, we also have some work that we do in Zambia, which is actually specifically for Zambia in terms of assisting with trade facilitation, as well as other work that we do in East Africa. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's what I wanted to share with you in terms of just getting you to understand who we are, what we do, and the reason why we are actually here today. With that, I would like to wish you productive discussions, and make sure that you get all the questions that you might have answered. We also will be sharing the tool itself, both as an electronic document as well as in the form of videos that we're actually finalizing for future sharing with the rest of exporters. With those words, I would like to hand you over back to Mayor Marina. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. George, for that clear overview. As we progress further, I'd like to just maybe provide a snapshot of our agenda in terms of how the morning is going to progress going forward. We've already done introductions that George has already given us an overview of your Trade and Investment Hub objectives. We have a good lineup of speakers and presentations coming up, also with remarks from the Lesotho National Development Corporation, following which we will have now a presentation on the cross-border toolkit itself, followed by an interactive session where we can ask questions or make comments. And then following that, we will have the Lesotho Revenue Authority taking us through the import-export code, following which we'll also have a chance to ask questions and make some comments. We'll have an interactive session after that. Then the Ministry of Trade and Industry, in particular the Director of Trade, will deliver some closing remarks for us. With that being said, please allow me to introduce Ndades Kitipotlo. Ndades Kitipotlo is from the Lesotho National Development Corporation. He is the General Manager for the Investment and Trade Promotion Business Unit. And the role of this unit is to attract and facilitate FDI flows with meaningful linkages to empower the private sector in Lesotho. Ndades Potlo has an economics and risk management background with over 16 years of experience in banking, in treasury, and investments management. Ndades Potlo, may we please welcome you to take us on. with remarks from the Lesotho National Development Corporation.
Thank you very much, Program Director, for the opportunity. As you rightly pointed out, my name is Sekete Potlo on behalf of the Lesotho National Development Corporation, and I'm the General Manager responsible for investment and trade promotion for the corporation. It is indeed my privilege, pleasure, and singular honor to welcome you all present with us today to this momentous occasion seeking to demystify trade with the Republic of South Africa. A very big thank you to USAID Southern African Investment and Trade Hub, our treasured strategic partner in promoting and supporting trade initiatives in Lesotho. We are indeed grateful for your unwavering support in advancing trade and investment objectives of the Kingdom of Lesotho. Your support will forever be highly valued in our cycles. Organizing and co-hosting this webinar for Lesotho exporters is indeed most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, we note that the government of Lesotho recognizes the critical role that trade plays as an engine for economic growth. It contributes immensely to the net worth of each nation. In our context, the critical role of trade is enshrined in the second National Strategic Development Plan, as well as in our National Trade Policy Framework. As a small landlocked economy completely encircled by South Africa, Lesotho is committed to continue to embrace trade as a key driver of economic growth and development by pursuing an export-led growth trajectory. In this context, the government of Lesotho, through its implementing entity, the LNDC, has partnered with the USAID Trade Hub as a strategic development partner to support interventions geared to advance export development at large. These include, inter alia, the vision to improve the level of compliance with international standards and market requirements by our local businesses, and undoubtedly the much needed cross-border trade efficiencies critical in improving trade culture at large. We shall also recall that Lesotho network of trade preferences has played a crucial role in providing favorable access to world markets. However, there are impediments that continue to hinder Lesotho's inability to fully utilize these market access opportunities. Some of the most commonly cited non-trade barriers are delays in the South African borders and the related risk of sealed consignments, reinspection of goods in transit, which often expose the consignments to risk of damage, theft, coupled with delays in border and border congestions. This is further compounded by lack of understanding on how to navigate and prepare export documents by many of our local businesses. These challenges form the basis for the development of a cross-border toolkit, which will serve as a guiding tool to provide exporting and export-ready companies with key skills required to start or increase exports of their products to the Republic of South Africa. Today's workshop is aimed at building export capacities to access the South African market as Lesotho's immediate and main trading partner in terms of both the imports and exports. It is also going to touch on the Exporters or Importers Code, which has recently been introduced by the South African Revenue Authority as an entry requirement into the South African market. It will be remiss of me, ladies and gentlemen, not to reiterate my deepest gratitude on behalf of the LNDC for the USAID Trade Hub and the government of the United States of America for their resolute support to the government of Lesotho in advancing Lesotho's trade agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you fruitful deliberations and please continue to stay safe amongst COVID-19 pandemic challenges and that continue to engulf the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ndate Potlo, for those good remarks that have really set the context within which USAID Trade Hub and LNDC have partnered to organize this event. I like that you specifically also highlighted the country's export-led economic growth strategy as the framework or the context within which we are carrying out this activity and many others that we do with LNDC as a partner. I will move forward now and get into introducing our presenter who will be taking us through the Toolkit presentation itself. This is Mary Gander. Mary is a trade and logistics consultant who has over 18 years of work experience. And in her current role as an independent consultant, she works with development agencies and companies to provide logistics, trade, process improvement, and value chain solutions to increase trade. So she has also served as an advisory board member for a TETA-sponsored enterprise development program. And Mary is passionate about promoting gender equality in the international trade sector and space. Mary is going to take us through the presentation of the cross-border toolkit. Mary, you can take it away for us.
Good morning, Marina. Thank you so much. I will share my screen. Okay, can you all see this clearly?
Yes, we can see it now.
Okay, great. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining us. I think the session would actually be very, very important, especially for those who are starting to export to South Africa and starting to export in general. Now, I've worked with the USA Trade Hub since last November, and actually it was December, yes. And we started by interviewing different stakeholders in all the neighboring countries. So it would have been the 8 countries that we are focusing on to export to South Africa. And from those meetings and interviews that we've had and the surveys that we have gotten the responses on, we've worked on the trade toolkit to actually give you some skills that's practical and easy to use. The toolkit consists mainly of the manual, which will give you an understanding of the export processes as well as the import processes in South Africa. Now, what we've realized is that when we looked at the 28 different commodities that we were focusing on, most of the commodities have different requirements in South Africa. So within the trade toolkit, you will have a tool where you can look up one of the commodities and it will give you an idea of what the requirements are, because our main focus was trying to make it as usable and as practical as possible. So what I'm going to do today is go through what we've done with the toolkit and the different topics that we've covered in it. Okay, so the presentation outline, we'll just go quickly over the Lesotho country profile, which I'm sure you don't really need considering you are from Lesotho. We'll look at the export readiness, export registrations, export process, the import process for South Africa, commodity-specific requirements, documentation that's required, Incoterms and contracts, and payment methods, and your next steps. Okay, these are some of the commodities that we're looking at. So it ranges from groundnuts, macadamia nuts, cashew nuts, to PPE and textiles and handicrafts. So what we had done was we had looked at the specific requirements for these commodities and what you would need to have in place to export to South Africa with these commodities. Okay. And for Lesotho, we mainly focused on fish, textiles and apparel, bottled water, medicinal plants and handicraft and accessories, and PPE. South Africa is Lesotho's main export destination, but Lesotho is also exporting to United States, Belgium, India, and the UAE. And when you look at different countries, they all have different requirements for imported goods. So it's important to actually understand these. And I think one of the main issues that exporters face is that they do not understand what the requirements are on the import side. And sometimes the importers also don't understand it. So you tend to have delays at the borders, you tend to have border stops, custom stops, the Department of Agriculture may stop your cargo and fine you. So these are things that we looked at, and then we said, okay, how can we actually avoid it going in future? What kind of information would an exporter actually need to avoid these risks that's associated with exporting? Okay. Before you actually start exporting, what we look at is assessing your own export readiness within your company and for your business. So for your business itself and for the product itself. Okay. Now, if you're looking at your company and your business, you really need to look at, how long have you been operating within Lesotho? What is your commitment really to exporting? Because what you will find is that you will need your management skills, you need the financial resources, which is one of the most important parts. And you'll need technical expertise, supply capacity, international market intelligence. So when you're going back to the commitment itself, you really need to understand that it's not a short-term process where you decide, okay, today I'm deciding I'm going to export to South Africa. And maybe I'll get an order within the next week or so. That's not how it happens. I mean, it takes sometimes 6 to 12 months just to get your first order and to get everything in place. So from the time you actually start advertising and finding the right trade portals and places where you can advertise to South African buyers, then you've got to have to make sure that the management within your company understands exports. They understand what the processes are, and that it is actually quite tedious. It's not an easy thing to go through because there's so many documents involved, and you have to make sure that all the documents are correct. The other thing you would definitely need is your financial resources. So do you have access to funds? Do you have access to investors? Do you have access to credit? Because, if you are getting an export order ready, it's not the same as a local order, because a local order, you may get it ready, deliver it, and you may have your payment almost immediately. But with an export order, there's different types of payment methods that you would have to go through and decide what's the best for you. So that means that you could be waiting sometimes for months to get your money in the bank. So in that time, do you have the finances to actually survive and keep a business going? Once you've spent, let's just say $100,000 or $5,000 even on your export order that you are sending, do you have that money to keep your business going? And do you have the access to other funds, maybe credit even, just to keep your business running until you get those payments? Technical expertise, this is mostly about your product. Do you understand who the different authorities are that inspects your product? That, if you're looking at standards, do you have the different organizations within the country? And do you have people within the company that understand this? And do you have the technical, the capacity to actually supply for exports? And moving on to supply capacity, if you're looking at export orders, they're normally much bigger than local orders. So do you have a factory that's big enough, or do you have enough machinery, enough labor to meet an export order? And so that is what we mean when we are looking at supply capacity. Do you have everything in place? International market intelligence. Do you understand what the requirements are in South Africa? Who are your competitors? Does South Africa have their own producers? Are they importing? And I know, being from South Africa, we normally import from China, India, the US. So we have a whole lot of trade partners that we work with. So you're literally competing with these companies. And moving on to product readiness, how successful is your product in the local market? Do you have consistent business? Is it doing well in the local market? Because if it is doing well and it's a product that we can use in South Africa, then yes, look at exporting to South Africa. Can your product be adaptable to the South African market? Because what may be acceptable in a local market may not necessarily be acceptable here in South Africa. If you're looking at something like honey, In South Africa, you need irradiated honey. You cannot import it if it's not. Whereas locally, you may not need to do that. The cost structure, there's so many other costs that's involved with exporting. So it's not just getting the product ready and having the labor and paying for the labor and your premises and so on, the usual business costs. You've got to look at customs duties, VAT, transport costs, freight forwarder costs. There's a whole lot of things that actually come into play when you're dealing with exports. So that is why, going back to your business readiness, do you have the finances to pay in advance for this? Depending on your Incoterm, you may actually have to pay for the customs duties and so on. Who are your competitors locally? Are they exporting? And your product complexity. Is it something that you can easily move to the next market? Can you actually just export it? I mean, if you export machinery to South Africa, would you have to look at after-sales service? And would you actually need to have somebody coming into South Africa to train someone how to use your product? So when you're assessing export readiness, you really have to look at all of these things. And it's not to put you off, but it's just so you are prepared, and you know what's coming ahead. These are the questions that you need to ask yourself, and then find solutions, find the answers. If you don't have the financial resources, look for investors or speak to your bank. If you're an established business, then maybe they will, um, assist with loans and so on, or trade finance. If people within the company do not have the management skills for exports, you could send them on training courses. So if you are not ready right now, that doesn't mean you can't be ready within the next 6 to 12 months. There's a lot of things you may need to put in place, but the idea is to be aware of what you need really when you export, when you're assessing your export readiness. Moving on to export registrations and developing relationships with key role players. When you become an exporter, there's so many different registrations that you may need. So you need to be aware of it right at the beginning. I mean, the first one is your normal business registration. And obviously, you need to be registered with your tax authority. You need to have your exporter registration. A lot of the times it's with your Department of Trade and Industry or with customs. You'll need to be registered with your International Chamber of Commerce so you can get your certificate of origin and your product specific registration. So that may be your Department of Agriculture. So when you're looking at your product and your business, make sure right at the beginning you work on every single registration, because these things may take time. Some registrations can take a day, others may take 2 to 4 weeks. Some can take a couple of months, depending on whether inspections need to be done at your premises and so on. Role players, you being the exporter, you would have to have a relationship with buyers. You need to find freight forwarders within your country, preferably those who have experience dealing with South Africa, because they will know the issues that's being faced currently. Your bank is very important. I mean, you have to have a relationship with your bank. You need to make sure that your finances are in order. So if there comes a point where you need a loan or you need investment or whatever it is, your bank statements are very important with this. Your buyer's notified party, and by this we mean your buyer's freight forwarder or their transport company. So you need to have a relationship with a whole lot of people and start getting to know them. Trade promotion service providers, USA Trade Hub partners with a lot of organizations that you could partner with that will help you with skills. USA Trade Hub is one of the organizations that would help you with skills and capital and so on, but they do work via the TPSPs. So you would need to be affiliated with them, and because they also have different types of information that they can share with you. And they can help you, if you need to come and visit South Africa on trade missions and so on. These are the people that can assist you and come. They are literally go-betweens between you and the government, if it's the Department of Trade and so on. So it's very, very important to actually be out there, literally networking with some of these organizations. When you look at freight forwarders, meet a few, find out what they do, what services they offer, what kind of prices that they charge, and make decisions from there. Okay, the export process. So once you've got everything ready and in place, the first step is trying to find buyers. And if you've advertised, somebody may come back to you and say, please provide a quote. So you need to know what to include in the quote. So the trade toolkit would actually tell you, these are the things that you need to include. So even if you don't outrightly, state that this is my labor costs, the labor costs need to be within your price itself. Okay. The export quote would include insurance, transport, the product cost per unit, the total product cost, VAT if you need to, and all the different charges that's relevant to getting the product to the buyer. And that would also depend on the Incoterm that you choose, and we'll go on to Incoterms in a little while. Your clearing and forwarding agent, as I've touched on before, you need to understand what services they offer. If something goes wrong, do they have the necessary links in South Africa or people that they can talk to get problems solved? And a lot of the times, there's a lot of issues at the borders. So you need somebody with a strong presence at the borders who has relationships that they can actually go and say, what is the problem here and how do we solve it? Because without a doubt, there will always be problems at the borders. There may always be inspections and so on. So you need somebody who actually knows how to handle all of this. Your pro forma invoice, once somebody actually accepts your quote, you need to actually provide them with a pro forma invoice with all the details. And it's pretty much the same information, depending on whether anything has changed between you and the buyer. Processing the export order, that's ensuring that the order is according to the stipulated requirements from the buyer. So if a buyer tells you, listen, I want 500 blue V-neck t-shirts, that is what you need to provide. So you need to make sure that whatever the order was, they may come up with a specific shade of blue. So it could be baby blue, it could be navy blue, and so on. So, at the export quote and the pro forma invoice stage, you need to get as much information as possible from the buyer, especially when you're dealing with different textiles and different designs and so on, that you are actually meeting their needs. Okay, so you need, during the processing the export order, yes, you need to get the order ready. According to what the buyer wants, you need to prepare the shipping documents. So your shipping documents would be your commercial invoice, packing list, your transport waybill, exchange control forms, permits, and so on. You'll need to make arrangements with the clearing and forwarding agents on the dates that they pick up and when they have to deliver, and so on. So receiving payment, if you are using a letter of credit, which we'll touch on a little later, you will need to present documents. So when you're presenting documents, you need to make sure that there are absolutely no errors on the documents. Everything has to be to the T. Everything has to be perfect, because when you have problems with documents, that is when your cargo gets stopped. So if the freight forwarder has submitted documents to customs, and you've got your documents, and if it's different, if customs has different information, immediately they will stop your cargo. So it's not something that, oh no, we don't want trade. They have triggers on their system. So if things don't match up, it will be stopped without a doubt. So make sure you're checking your documentation. After sales service is obviously, contacting the buyer to make sure that everything's okay with the goods, making sure everything's in place, and looking for more business from the same buyers, really. import process, which you don't really need to understand a lot, but it's good to be aware of because it may impact what happens at the borders and whether things you get fined and so on. So import registration, South African companies will have to do the import registration with, you know, the normal business registrations, the import registration with customs and so on. They would need their own clearing and forwarding agents. Unless you're doing a delivery to them, then they won't need it, you know, directly to their warehouse or factory, and you are taking care of everything, as in the DDP Incoterm, then, you know, they won't need a clearing and forwarding agent, but that will be decided between the two of you. Import clearance, you know, they'll have to look at what customs duties and HS codes. So your customs duties is based on the HS code, and each product would have an HS code. And based on that HS code, customs will automatically pick up what the customs duties are. Now, if you're operating under the SADC trade agreement, you don't really need to worry about customs duties, but you may need to worry about, look, you're going to be paying 15% VAT, which a lot of people are not aware of. The other thing, there may be excise duties. So customs duties, it would in most cases be zeroed, but if it's a product that does incur excise duties like luxury goods, then you may need to pay a certain percentage, like 7% for excise. Documentation, the same documentation that you would need is more or less the same that importer would need: the commercial invoice, packing list, transport waybill, exchange control forms, and permits. Sometimes shipments are stopped for inspection, and this is usually if the documentation is not in order. Okay, because otherwise there's no way for customs to know that there's an issue, or the Department of Agriculture to know there's an issue. They will look at the type of cargo and if it needs an import permit. So a lot of agricultural products need import permits. And if it's not in place, then they will, without a doubt, stop your cargo. They may even fine you, or they may confiscate the cargo. So that's money lost. That is why the documentation part is so important, and the preparation part. Okay, so what we've done with the Trade Toolkit was looked at, you know, if you're exporting coffee, as in some countries are within the USA Study Hub focus countries. So if they are exporting coffee, this is how your VAT is calculated. So it 15% of your FOB value plus duty plus excise plus fuel plus 10% of FOB value. Now, if, as in this case, it's coming from Lesotho, then the value must not be increased by the 10% FOB value. Okay. And then your total landed cost would include your export, your origin charges, insurance, freight, and your duties and taxes. Okay. Now, for coffee, you need an import permit, and that's controlled by the Department of Trade and Industry. Okay, and then you have your inspections. These are the inspecting organizations. You know, you've got your Directorate of Plant and Quality Control and your Department of Agriculture. Okay, and some import prohibitions may apply. Okay, so if you're looking at something as in bottled water, these are, you know, this would also need an import permit. So it will state import permit is required. Now, as an exporter, you're not responsible for the import permit. It's the importer is responsible for it. So prior to exporting, you need to check with the importer if they have an import permit. And the import permit will be based on the information you give them. So you need to provide that pro forma invoice and details of shipment. And, you know, it takes about 30 days to get an import permit. So the buyer needs to make sure that they have an import permit before you export, so that there's no hiccups and there's no issues when the cargo is crossing the border. If you don't have an import permit, that cargo is going to be stopped. you will get a fine, it will be confiscated. So these are the things that happen on a daily basis, and it's all because of one document. And that is why we put this together, because if you know this, then you can avoid it, and you can speak to your buyers and say, do you have an import permit, because this may be required for this cargo, and then they can contact the Department of Agriculture here in South Africa, and they can speak to them and submit their documents, pay the fees, and get the import permit. They can be a bit helpful when needed. So there's no, and I've been speaking to them quite a bit. So it's just about following the processes with a lot of organizations. Now, I've just taken a screenshot of one part of the commodity specific requirements to show you what's on the trade toolkit, but it does cover the 27 or 28 products that we worked on. Okay, so now that you've spoken to a buyer, the next step is actually forming your contract. So you make an offer by advertising. So when you've advertised and you've given them a price, that is you making an offer. So when you decide, okay, you don't want to make that offer, you're not happy with the price, that means revoking the offer. The acceptance of an offer is when someone comes back to you and says, I'm happy with the price. Can you please, I'd like to order 500 t-shirts at that price. So that is an acceptance of an offer. The rejection of the offer is if somebody comes back to you and says, you were charging $2 per t-shirt or $5 per t-shirt, but I want 500 t-shirts at $4. Okay, that is also a rejection of the offer. Okay. If they say no, they're not happy with your quote, that is a rejection of the offer. And then when you are advertising, you need to have a time frame. So you can say this price is available for the next 7 days or the next 30 days or so on, depending on, if it's a sale price or if it's your normal price and so on. Now, your formation of the contract is not a normal written down contract. It's literally just going back and forth with the buyer on emails, and it's preferably emails because a lot of countries do accept email as a form of proof. Okay, so once you've entered into a contract and somebody says, okay, they've accepted the price, they've accepted the conditions, and they're happy to order from you. So you as the seller, your obligations are to deliver the goods. You need to hand over any documents related to the goods, and you must transfer the property in the goods. And by transfer the property in the goods, we mean transfer the bill of lading or transport waiver, because these are literally the title deeds of the cargo. So whoever has that bill of lading is the person that actually owns it, and usually it would be either the shipper or the consignee or even a notified party. So you need to make sure that the buyer has the bill of lading or the waiver. The conformity of the goods. So when you are preparing the goods must conform to the quantity, quality, and description. Before you send out an order, you need to make sure, you need to count, you need to make sure the quality is the same as what is requested. You need to make sure that the description is the same. So if somebody said they want round neck t-shirts and you are giving them v-neck, then the goods are not conforming. The goods must be fit for purpose. So what we mean is that it needs to be, people may need to be able to use the goods for whatever purpose that was. So if you're sending machinery, it needs to work. Okay, the goods must possess the same quality as the sample or model. So, we've had issues previously in South Africa where, when we first started ordering from China had excellent quality. Okay. And obviously that was because they were competing with the South African market, they were competing with the Lesotho exporters, Swaziland exporters, and so on. So they had sent excellent quality samples, and after a few months or a few years, the quality started reducing, and it became quite a big issue because you find a lot of imports that's not as good quality. I mean, the clothes, you don't get the same quality that you would have gotten 20 years ago that was produced locally in South Africa. So quality is very, very important. If you say your quality is to a specific standard, it needs to be, because it depends on which stores you're selling to. So if you're selling to Woolworths, even within Woolworths, they have different qualities depending on the brands within Woolworths. So you need to be aware of it. So you need to make sure that you are giving them the quality that was ordered. The goods must be contained or packaged to preserve and protect the goods. So however it's packaged, it must preserve the goods. So you cannot have clothes, just in cardboard boxes because they may get wet or so. So you may need to cover it in plastic and so on. Obligations of the buyer. The buyer is required to pay the price, which includes taking the steps and complying with formalities and required under the contract. And the buyer must take delivery of the goods. So the buyer knows that the delivery is going to be done on the 20th of August, 2021. They need to make sure that they are available to take that delivery. Obviously, unless something, that you didn't prepare for happened or so on, and then we can always change the date of delivery. But under normal circumstances, they need to take delivery of goods when they are supposed to. Contract remedies. Now, it's very hard when you're dealing with international trade to actually remedy a contract. So if somebody doesn't do what they're supposed to do, I'm not in Lesotho, so I can't come and say, hey, you didn't send me the right goods and so on. So, you have the contract of sale of international goods, which is the rights and remedies for the buyers and the sellers. And that is where I've pulled this information from. So the buyer rights is the buyer may claim for damages. The buyer may request substitute goods. If the goods do not conform to the contract, the buyer may require the seller to repair the product. The buyer may fix an additional period of time for the seller to perform his obligations, or the buyer may terminate the contract. So let's just say you were getting an order ready for South Africa, and you were supposed to have it transported on the 20th of August. Get your freight forwarder to pick it up or the transporter to pick it up. But that order is going to take another 3 weeks. You need to let the buyer know in advance. So the buyer can decide in advance whether they go ahead with the contract and say, okay, I can wait another 3 weeks. Or if they say, no, I want to terminate the contract. Okay, it's very important to keep people advised, especially in international business, because the last thing I want as a buyer is to be sitting and contacting you every other day to say, where's my cargo? Because it will completely ruin the relationship between us. I will never want to buy from you again, because remember, when you're selling to me, I have other customers that I need to see to, and I would have told them, okay, by the 31st of August, I know I'm getting my goods, and I will deliver it to you on the 1st of September. So by you not advising the buyer of any changes or any issues, it's a ripple effect. So I may lose business, which means you will definitely lose business. Okay. The seller's rights. The seller may claim damages. The seller may require the buyer to make payment, take delivery, or perform his other obligations. The seller may fix an additional period of time for the buyer to perform his obligations, or the seller may terminate the contract. Now, when you're looking at the seller's rights and your rights, a lot of the time it mainly has to do with payment. So right at the beginning, you need to set out exactly how you want payment. So if you want 50%, when I place the order, you need to state that. And 50% when the docs are handed over, or whatever it is. Or if you want to be paid according to a letter of credit. All of this needs to be stated on the pro forma invoice and the commercial invoice, because that is what the invoice is for, to state what the amount is and how you expect payment. Because remember, we don't have a real contract where we're sitting and signing it and so on. Passing of risk, loss of or damage to the goods after the risk has passed to the buyer does not discharge him from his obligation to pay the price unless the loss or damage is due to an act or omission of the seller. Now, passing of risk is who is responsible when something goes wrong? Who is responsible when the goods get damaged? Who is responsible if the transporter has an accident and the goods are damaged? So that will be based on Incoterm and where risk has passed. So right up until where risk passes, whether it's at the border post or whether it's until it gets to the carrier, you need to make sure that you have insurance for your goods. So if anything goes wrong, you know that your cost will be covered for that. Okay, Incoterms. Now I've touched on Incoterms and mentioned it quite a few times. For those of you who don't know Incoterms, it's international commercial terms. They provide internationally accepted definitions and rules of interpretation for commercial terms used in contracts for the sale of goods. Now, normally what you would do is you'd say, okay, our risk will pass at the stage. I will pay for the transport right up until it gets to your freight forwarder here in Lesotho, or I will pay for the transport right up until it gets to your premises in South Africa. I will be responsible for getting the transport arranged, for getting the freight forwarder arranged, or whatever it is. So these become very long stories between the buyer and the seller, going back and forth and saying, I'll be responsible for this, you'll be responsible for that. Now, what Incoterms has done, and the International Chamber of Commerce, is they've actually set out these terms to say, if it is DDP, which is delivery duty paid, it means you will bring it to my premises and you'll pay for all the costs until it comes to my premises. If it's X Works, with your address on it, it means I will pick up from you and I will incur all the costs. And then all the other Incoterms are literally different places in between you and myself, you, the seller, and me, the buyer. So when you're selecting these Incoterms, you need to consider the following: your experience with international trade. Now, if you don't have a lot of experience, try and get the buyer to pick up from you. The risk associated with the Incoterm, if you don't want a lot of risk and you're not used to this whole process, then as much as possible, try to get them to pick up from you, so you don't have to deal with all the risk and of getting it into South Africa and dealing with the South African market and the issues that are here. The cost and financial responsibility. So depending on where we pass risk and cost. So if it's X Works, all you have to do is get it ready in your warehouse and have it on a specific space in your warehouse ready for pickup. If it's DDP, it means you're bringing it all the way to my warehouse or my premises, and that means you're covering all those costs for it. Experience handling the transport operators, suppliers for international shipments, and so on. So you need to really look at your experience. I need to look at my experience, and then we agree on an Incoterm that works for both of us. Okay, so Incoterms has been updated for years. So every 10 years they're updated. These are Incoterms 2010. You have separate Incoterms for sea and inland waterways, which we will not be using because this is overland cargo. And these are the Incoterms that we can use for overland cargo or even domestic cargo. So X Works is where I pick up from you. Free carrier is where you get it right up until your freight forwarder or the transporter picks it up, maybe the transporter's premises or warehouse. It's delivered there and then they make arrangements to bring it. Carriage paid to. Here again, it's up until the main carriage. And then, the insurance would be covered by me. So it's good to understand all of these. We've covered 2010 and 2020 Incoterms in the Trade Toolkit. So you've got Incoterms 2020. There have been some changes. So you still have your 4 Incoterms for C, and now you've got 7 Incoterms for land. Okay, but you don't really need to worry about these changes and so on, because what we've done is we've provided an Excel sheet with the year, the acronym, the DAT, which is delivered at terminal, what mode of transport it can be used. So if you are stating it on your document, you put DAT and your premises address, or whichever terminal or port that it is DAT for. Okay, so it'll be delivered at terminal and a specific terminal. If it's delivered at place, it'll be DAP and that specific place. Okay, now we've also given you the place of delivery and a explanation. So if you choose 2010 DAP, it'll tell you exactly where you have to place the goods at a name, place of destination. So you need to make sure you have a specific address. What the seller is responsible when it comes to cost and documents, what documents you need to provide. But just remember, no matter what Incoterm you are using, as a seller, you need to provide all the documents. So you'll need a certificate of origin, the phytosanitary certificate where required, commercial invoice, packing list, export customs clearance, and so on. And the risk is passes at place of delivery at the agreed time. So when you are looking at your cargo insurance, you need to make sure you know exactly where the delivery place is and you have your cargo insurance up until there. So if anything happens between the time it leaves your premises right to delivery, you'll be covered for it. And from the moment it's delivered, then it's my responsibility as the buyer to have that insurance covered now. So this is how Incoterms helps you. So you don't need to worry about where does risk pass, where when does the cost pass, and so on. The Incoterms are there to actually help you and say, okay, this is where it passes, this is the address, and this is what you as a seller is responsible for, and the cost. These are the documents you need to get ready, and this is where it passes to me as the buyer. So we've tried to make it as easy as possible and to actually cover as much of the information as possible. Okay, we've got 4 different payment methods. The first is cash in advance. So if I decide that I want to pay you in advance, there are some buyers who do it. And normally if you're dealing with, websites like Alibaba and so on, and you buy fewer orders, you need to pay in advance. You could also use a letter of credit. These are a bit costly because you have your bank involved. And then you've got the documentary credit, which is not expensive as the letter of credit. But, the bank is involved. They will handle the payments, but they may not hold the goods if the documents don't conform and so. Okay, open account is where there's a good relationship between the buyer and seller. So as in when I get my payments, that's fine. But these normally happen between in-house companies. So if Toyota in Japan is exporting to Toyota in South Africa, they would have an open account. You and I as new sellers and buyers will not have an open account. So we'll have to decide between a letter of credit, documentary credit, and so on. Moving on to the next steps, you will need to understand the process that needs to be followed for your specific commodity, build relationships with key role players and stakeholders, attend relevant meetings and trade shows, and focus on your core business and delegate work that can be done by others, like specialists. So when it comes to transport and so on, get specialists to deal with it, so you don't have to worry about dealing with trucks and all of those things. The other thing is to invest time and money in building your export business. Okay, thank you.
Mary, thank you very much for that elaborate and very clear presentation. We are at 5 minutes after 11, and we will provide for 10 minutes of interactive discussions where we'll take questions. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any question that you'd like to pose. I'll also check in the chat box. I see 1 or 2 in there as well. For now, I'm not seeing any hands. So what I will do is just maybe pick from the chat box. I see a question from Datema Supa Mushweshwe. It's related to a section of the Bill of Entry, and he is requesting clarification or an explanation of what it means to say, for the movement of goods between South Africa and the other members of SACU, importers must complete a customs controlled area CCA1 that is reconciled with SAD. I think he's seeking just a bit of clarification on what that is about. You did touch on that, Mary. So if you could just provide a clarification on that from Datema Supa.
Sorry, can you just repeat that question again?
It's in the chat box. He just wants a clarification of what it means to say, for the movement of goods between South Africa and other members of SACU, importers must complete a customs controlled area CCA1 form reconciled with SAD.
Okay, that mainly has to do with the fact that you are moving goods within SACU or the SADC region. So you need to prove where these goods are coming from. And to do that, that is where you get your certificate of origin. So it's a customs clearance controlled area, and it will be dependent on your, so it's just a document that you need to complete, but it's basically to state where the goods are, the origin of the goods, and that it is covered by SACU or SADC. So you don't actually have to pay duties on it.
Thank you, Mary. I think that the same person that Masupa also had asked on issues of whether for every code that they provide, they should provide time validity.
Yes, definitely. Because when you provide a time validity, let's just say 7 days or 30 days, you're covering yourself, and somebody doesn't come 6 months later when the prices of your supplies have changed, or there's some other issues that you need to deal with. Because in business, your costs will always be changing. So you need to make sure that when you offer a quote, you give them a time validity, whether it's 7 days or 14 days. So you know, most likely nothing will change in that time, but you need to give them some sort of time frame. That is just to cover yourself, because if I come 6 months later with the price that you gave me, 6 months ago, you might actually lose out a lot, depending on what has happened. I mean, just with COVID alone, we saw how prices increased. I mean, even in South Africa, prices of goods have increased so much. Even if you go to the supermarket to buy something. So now, if you didn't cover yourself with that validity, you'd still have to offer me those goods at the price as you advertised before. So to avoid all of that, you just need to make sure that you have a time validity there on your quote.
Thank you. I think that is quite clear. It is to the advantage of the exporter to provide that time validity on the quote. And the last question from Datema Supa is on, may you kindly repeat acceptance and rejection of order, please? Datema Supa, would you like to explain this one a little further? Was this related to obligations of the seller, obligations of the buyer? Would you like to just maybe come on screen or unmute your mic and just explain this one?
Okay, thank you so much, Mme. What I was looking for on this one, it was on saying on the order, maybe you're saying you're paying for somebody you quote him for $50, and at a later stage he says, I'll buy these products at this quantity, but I'm paying $40. On that regard, I was not clear. Is it a rejection of order, or he canceled the first quote?
It's a rejection of that quote, really. So you've made an offer by saying it's $50.
Yeah.
for that item, and they've come back saying, but I don't want it at $50, which means they're rejecting it, and then they are making a counter offer to say, I want it at $40. So that means that offer is no longer valid because they've rejected it. And then you can decide whether or not you want to give it at $40 or you want to go negotiate and say, no, well, I can only do it for $45. Because without a doubt, you are going to get negotiations. And that's why you need to be very careful about how you're quoting and what costing you include in it.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Most welcome, Tate. Happy you are answered. Thank you, Mary. Mayor Papadi, yes, we will share the slides. I see your request in the chat box also that we should share the slides with participants. We will do that. I see a question from Ndate Moshe, Social Productions. Says, kindly provide a detailed information of the steps to follow when applying for importers, exporters code, especially for Lesotho companies. Okay, this we will deal with in the next session. The Lesotho Revenue Authority is going to present on that in the demo. So let's just hold on to it and we'll get back to it when we get there. And I see another comment from Pasta Productions says, for products that are made from recycled materials, are there any permits I will need to acquire as a seller? And if so, where can I get such permits? This is for recycled material products.
We haven't covered that, but we would need to know exactly what products you are providing and what materials you're using, and then maybe we can assist. So what I would suggest is you contact your country rep, which the details will be given to you at the end of this session. And then just pose your question there and they can pass it on to me and I will find out. So what I would need to know is exactly what materials you are using and what products you are making from them. Then I can check with the different agencies in South Africa what's required. And then from there, we can work backwards and see what's required from your side.
Thank you, Mary. So we will post the contacts in the chat and also I'll get back to them towards the end of our session today. So we will craft a more customized response for you, Pasta Productions. Ndate Johannetepo, I see your hand. Please come on stage, Ndate. You may unmute and ask a question. Ndate Johanne, Ndatepo. It looks like you're still on mute, and Tsepo.
Okay. In the meantime, someone has said that they would like elaborate notes would be helpful if affordable. Those notes would actually be in the toolkit when that has been published. So you will be able to go through the full document of the toolkit and all the explanations and even examples of your pro forma invoice and quotes and so on will be in that document.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mary. Okay, looks like there may be a bit of a technical glitch there with Ndate. We will still take your question, Ndate, at a later stage. Maybe we should now continue with the next presentation, which was supposed to have started at 10 minutes after 11. Mary, thank you very much. As questions come up that we believe you would provide answers to, we'll still fill them to you later on. Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. I take this opportunity to introduce Mary Nzamosase from the Lesotho Revenue Authority. She is the Client Services Division Manager based at the Maseru Bridge Border Post. And her role there entails management of the workstation and facilitation of cross-border trade through implementation of the customs procedures with a view to increase client satisfaction, promotion of voluntary compliance, including provision of social protection. Mayor Rensing is going to give us a presentation on the import-export code, what it is about and how we can go about acquiring it. Mayor Mosase.
Thank you very much, Marina, and greetings to everyone in here. It is a privilege to be given this opportunity to provide clarity on this burning issue, which I know that it impacts a lot on the movement of cross-border trade. And can you please allow me to start by explaining what exactly is this exporters code? Exporters code, it is a South African requirement at the Office of the Revenue Administration, the South African Revenue Services, SARS. And before I delve much into the exporters code, I should start with explaining why we are now faced with this exporters code. First of all, there is the value added tax, the VAT. VAT is the destination-based revenue that is collected at the consumer's point. For instance, where goods are bought from South Africa or out of Lesotho, the VAT is payable at the country of destination, being Lesotho now as the importer. And between Lesotho and South Africa, after the VAT introduction, there was an agreement that the VAT on exports from South Africa has to be refunded to the importing country through the agreement that these two revenue administrations, SARS and LRA, entered onto. As I have mentioned, at the introduction of the VAT at LRA back in 2003, LRA moved from the sales tax collection scheme rather to the VAT. And in that case, most of Basotho or Lesotho-based companies who buy goods from South Africa and pay tax to the suppliers were subjected to pay tax to the supplier, then come to Lesotho and pay another tax when they get to Lesotho in the form of cash. It was paid in the form of cash because after they have exported their goods out of South Africa, they were given the checks in refund of the VAT that they paid in South Africa. And as they proceed to Lesotho now to import their goods, they were then supposed to pay the VAT to the LRA in cash, simply because the checks that they were offered as the refund on the South African side were not legible to be now forwarded to the LRA to pay the import VAT required on the goods that they bought. So noting the cash flow challenges that were borne by the Basotho and Lesotho businesses, the two administrations then came to an MOU to say, hang on, now that we are on the same format of collecting tax on goods, let us reach an agreement as to how we can alleviate the challenges that the people are encountering with regards to the tax. Marina, can we move to the next slide, please? I think on this slide, I have already talked about it a little bit, where I mentioned that LRA was operating on the sales tax era before introduction of the VAT. And with the implementation of the VAT, of the MOU that the LRA and SARS agreed on, there are conditions that were supposed to be met such that the proof of payment or the invoices that are used on the purchase of the goods have to be now converted into payment to the LRA. First of all, LRA had to introduce another mode of payment for import VAT besides cash and the deferment account that is commonly known. Then they introduced the use of the tax invoices. That means the invoices through which goods were procured in South Africa had to be submitted to the LRA for now to be turned into payment. But these invoices are also supposed to meet certain conditions. For instance, the invoices have to be submitted in their original format, and they are supposed to bear the invoice date, the invoice number, as well as the VAT registration number of the supplier. That means the business in South Africa which has issued this invoice should be registered with SARS for collection of VAT. The reason being, if the seller has charged VAT on the goods, and now the same invoice is going to be submitted to Lesotho for purposes of a VAT refund. When such an invoice gets back to SARS for claiming the VAT back, the supplier should have now remitted the tax at the end of the month, as is the case. So you can imagine if I buy from a business that is not registered with VAT with SARS in South Africa for VAT purposes, when I go back to get the refund of that VAT, it would not be there because that supplier is not registered for VAT collection. Okay, can we move to the next slide, Mme? As I've just mentioned, so the two revenue administrations in Lesotho and South Africa entered on an MOU to agree on how the agreement can work on these invoices. So the person who has bought the goods in South Africa with a valid tax invoice is no more supposed to pay VAT in cash when they get to the border. Instead, they just submit their valid tax invoices per the conditions that I have mentioned. Well, I have not mentioned all the conditions for a valid tax invoice, but those are the key ones. The invoice should have the VAT registration number of the supplier. It should be indicating the invoice date or the purchase date, because the purchase date is important because the invoices have a lifespan of 3 months. That means 3 months is counted from the date of purchase. They have to be submitted to the LRA within that period. For instance, if the goods were bought on the 1st of January, they should be exported between the 1st of January and the 1st of April, where the 30 days now lapse. If such an invoice gets to be submitted to the LRA beyond this validity period, it is no more acceptable, meaning that the VAT now has to be paid in cash. Other than that, the tax invoices are supposed to indicate the rate of VAT that is imposed on the value of the goods, which is supposed to be at the rate of 15%. It's either the rate or the amount paid. The amount should also be equivalent to the 15% because the 15% is the standard rate for VAT. Other than that, the tax invoices, for them to be acceptable, there should be a proof of payment. A proof of payment is separate from the tax invoice. So I will explain that the invoice is the indication of the goods that have been bought or procured. It's just a detail of what has been bought, from whom to whom, and what goods are and what the amount has been. But the proof of payment is an indication of the amount paid to the supplier from the buyer, which can either be in the form of an EFT or cash. In the form of, in the event that the mode of payment has been cash, the proof would be the cash receipt. Other than that, if the buyer has used a credit card or a debit card, the proof of payment in that event would be the POS slip. all these documents, they are not required in original format. Instead, just a copy. The copy of either the receipt, the POS slip, or the VAT has to be attached to the original invoice. The invoice is the only document that is required in original format. So over and above this, the declaration form, which is the SAD, has to be filled with the particulars of the importer. An importer who has an exporter's code. The exporter's code, which is now our main subject that I'm going to explain now. An exporter's code is a customs number required by South African Revenue Services for clients to register with them. It's a number required by South African Revenue Services for clients to register with them for customs purposes. There are different customs purposes that clients can register with SARS for. But this one of importer or exporter's code, it is purely meant for regulation of the imports and exports relating to such an entity or individual. It applies to both individuals and or businesses. Can we move to the next slide, ma'am? Back before the modernization of at SARS, people were still allowed to import their goods without a formal declaration that is requiring them to make it through the clearing agents. People would still go over to SARS customs windows to get an export clearance through a physical endorsement. But with the modernization program, where the customs processes were migrating from being manual but to being automated, then the requirements to now also lodge the declarations in computers then were put in place. And with the developments therein, the exporter's code came in. The exporter's code is only required for Lesotho-based companies as and when they buy goods on indirect supply. An indirect supply situation is whereby the goods are bought from a South African supplier and the VAT is payable to the supplier. Over and above that, those goods are transported by the importer. And upon export out of South Africa, such goods are moved out of South Africa by the buyer. And moving the goods out of South Africa by the buyer, this is where the exporter's code now comes into play. As and when the declaration forms are filled, I'm not sure as to how many of us in here are conversant with the declaration, the SAD form. The SAD form is the customs declaration which requires the details of the buyer and the seller. No, in fact, not the seller, instead the importer and the exporter. So on the part of the exporter, in the event that the tax has been paid to the supplier, and now the importer is the one responsible for moving the goods, we will see the details of the buyer. We should now draw a distinction. There is a buyer, there's an exporter, and there's also the importer. First of all, if I'm a Lesotho-based company, I go to South Africa to buy goods. I'm the buyer at that stage, and my supplier XYZ is the supplier. And now as I move the goods out of South Africa now to Lesotho, when we are filling a customs declaration, a customs declaration requires the details of the person who is moving the goods out of South Africa, as well as the details of the person who is now will be accepting the goods in the importing country. Then if I have paid VAT in South Africa and I'm the one moving the goods, definitely I'm also responsible for moving the goods out of South Africa. Therefore, the essay on the SAD, the details of the exporter would be mine, as well as the details of the importer, because even though I'm the buyer, I'm also importing and I'm exporting. So for me to be the exporter on the South African side, I should be registered with SARS for Importer Exporters Code. It is called the Importer or Exporters Code because if you are importing into South Africa, you are a South African-based company, it enables you to now do business with SARS, the import business with SARS. You are importing the goods out of South Africa, bringing them to South Africa. The same number is also going to assist you to move the goods out of South Africa to another country where you are now exporting. So the need for you to have this number is merely to help you with that. I hope it's clear. Can we move to the next slide, Me? Aha. Before I delve into this one, let me also explain that if one is importing most of his goods in South Africa through this indirect supply method, and they are also applying for their own exporters code, or they are not interested in maybe having the exporters code of their own, they are also at liberty to nominate a South African-based agent who has an exporter's code to now act as their agent on all their imports or exports. Meaning that if I am renting now, staying in Lesotho, I need to apply for an exporter's code, or I don't feel like I need to apply for an exporter's code, but I am a regular importer from South Africa. I can find someone in South Africa who has an exporter's code to now export on my behalf. The nomination of an exporter's code, as well as the application for an exporter's code, they are processed through an application or applications made to SARS. And the application period or the processing of the applications for both individual exporters code numbers or the nomination has been stated to be at around 10 working days. And the application or the registration is done online. However, there have been challenges from the history of the people who have been applying for the exporters code as we interact with them. They stated that the reason that the registration is done online, it's a bit cumbersome on some of them, simply because it's not everyone who is able to navigate through the internet to apply for an exporter's code or do whatever kind of business online. Other than that, they also stated that the turnaround time, even if it's 10 working days as stated by SARS, at other times it takes more than that. Besides that, there has been COVID on both Lesotho and South Africa, or even around the globe, let me say that, which affected the performance of the offices at SARS, because now the number of people that had to work there was supposed to be reduced. Hence, one can say maybe that is why now the turnaround times were not met. And having received all these challenges from our clients, the Lesotho Revenue Authority, together with SARS, have ongoing discussions that are held at the high level, led by the Commissioner Client Services from the Lesotho Revenue Authority, whereby these challenges are discussed in order to come up with mitigations. And some of the mitigations that have been agreed was that in as much as the registration is online, can SARS Free State, at least looking at the geographical location of Lesotho, allow one of its offices to be a submission point or a lodgement point? And it has been agreed that Maseru Bridge and Maputo Bridge on the South African side are the points where the submission of applications can be made. However, they are not made like every day, Monday to Monday. They are made between Tuesday and Friday and are only made during the working hours from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. And as and when the applications are made, there should also be a clearing agent that is going to represent a client who is applying for an exporter's code. Because of the customs jargon, not every ordinary person would be able to respond to the questions that are required on the application form, hence the need for a clearing agent. I have not provided on the presentation here the requirements as and when one applies for an exporter's code, but let me just run through the list a little bit. It's not that long. It requires that one should have the business documents, which are a trader's license, a valid one, of course, as well as the tax clearance certificate. There should also be a nomination letter. This nomination letter is for the agent that is going to represent the applicant from the Lesotho side. And the agent should be a South African-based agent who will be able to navigate through the SARS website for whatever information that is required. There should also be a passport of the director, the proof of address for both the director and the business itself, as well as the bank account held in South Africa, just to mention a few of the requirements that are required for an exporter's code. And I should also make a mention that for an individual application, there are different forms when you apply for your own exporter's code and as and when you are nominating an agent. Ma'am Marina, can we move to the next slide, please? I think I have listed the forms, the different forms in there. Yes, when you apply for a self-registration, you have to fill a DA 185, but for the nomination of an agent is the DA 185D. There goes a long list of whatever regime that you want to register with SARS Customs for. And all these forms are obtainable on the SARS website, as I've indicated up there. And we can go through that website to get the forms and see what requirements are there. However, for clarity and explanation, we have the Lesotho Commercial Border Post, the managers who are based at the Lesotho Commercial Border Posts, which are Maseru, Maputo, Caledoni, Van Rooyens, and Qacha, to provide an explanation. I think on this one, we have to be clear that we are only explaining, but for us to obtain the forms and further details, such information can be required from our counterparts on the South African side. I think this slide is bringing us to the end of my presentation. Marina, we can move to the next slide and see, yes, that is the end of my presentation, and thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mayor Thing. That's a very insightful and helpful presentation. And even before I take any questions, maybe I can just go back to Ndate Moshe and say, Ndate Moshe, would you feel that your question has been responded to? Prior to this presentation, you had posed a question on provision of detailed information on steps to follow when applying for an importers exporters code. Are you happy with the presentation that has been given covering that? Would you have any specific question now to refine that question or to add on to that? Before I take other questions, I already see some hands.
Yes, the information was very useful, but I still have some few direct questions to raise. For example, it has been said that to apply for exporters code, one must write a nomination letter for an agent that will represent our company. So I want to know, perhaps I didn't hear right, that should the agent be based in Lesotho or be based in South Africa? That is my first question. Secondly, I want to ask this question on the context of Lesotho Productions as a local company based in Lesotho. Which forms must we fill between DA 185 and DA 185D? And thirdly, it was said on the presentation that one of the documents required is the banking details. So I didn't hear quite well. Are they banking details for Lesotho, for a Lesotho-based bank or South African-based bank on behalf of Social Productions? That will be my questions for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ndate Moshe. Mayor Musase, I think before I take more hands, because Ndate Moshe has had 3 questions on where the agent should be based, on which form between the DA 186 and DA 185D, and also on the banking details. May I just allow you to provide some clarities on those before we take other hands?
Okay, thank you very much, Marina and Ndate Moshe, for your questions. Let me start with the first one, the location of the agent. The location of the agent is not an issue so much, but what is required is that the agent should be registered with SARS. The reason why I'm saying it's not an issue is because we have the agents who are located in Lesotho, but registered with both SARS and LRA. There are also agents which are located in South Africa, but are registered with both LRA and SARS. What matters is the registration. I hope it's clear. Then let me move to the second one. The second one, he wanted to know as to which forms they should fill. As the business in Lesotho, when you apply for your own importer-exporters code, the form that you are filling is the DA 185. It's your individual application form. But where you are nominating an agent, you are nominating an agent because you don't want to be an exporter. You will have to fill the DA 185D. And in the event where the requirement of the banking details is, it is the South African-based bank that is required. And I have also learned that on this one, that if the applicant doesn't have a South African-based bank account, they are also allowed to use the bank details of their agent, whereby they are nominating a South African-based agent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor, for those responses and clarifications. Let me take a few hands. Ntate Masupa Mosheshe, Ntate Johanne Tshepo, Mayor Madoka Matla, in that order.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor Renzen, for this presentation. It is very elaborate and very clear. However, I have a concern or a suggestion in that regard, because I'm sitting here, let's say that I'm inputting, and then I'm an exporter of the finished products. I'm an importer of the raw material into Lesotho. And then I'm required to register with South African Revenue, which is Lesotho and South Africa, they're falling under one region or one association, which is SACU. And they have different methods of how they run their operation, which is maybe it's understandable because each country has its own. But as you're saying, in the high level, there cannot be a seamless for SACU to have one regulation, one certificate, or one way, like my driver's license, which is said SADC, which can be driving between all the region of SADC. So when I go to LRA, which is the revenue authority of my country, and I apply all those things, export and importer code, that I can use in this country or in this region, is not something that may be in the high level that we can come up with. Because all these documents that you are mentioning, I'm feeling defeated where I am. I don't think like it's just so disturbing. It's not something that actually I can actually comprehend from where I'm sitting. It's too much documents and requires another agent, which is something, again, I don't understand. Why should I use agent to apply as something that I can get as an entrepreneur into LRA? Why can't we have where we can just go to LRA and get everything and then be like clearance and everything from one point as one? And that's where my comment is on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ntate Masupa. That is noted. We will take the next hand so that we handle the three at a go. I think the next hand was it Ntate Johanne Tshepo, and then Mema Jokamatla.
Thank you very much, Memarina. I'm Ntate Johanne from Johanne Garments. My very few questions is, you mentioned mentioned how the exporters code and importers code are applied in terms of the point, like Maseru Bridge and Maputo Bridge, and she mentioned the time, but I missed the day. Is there any specific day that the applications are made? I missed that one. I couldn't get that one. And number two is there any minimum amount whereby you can say, no, this one it doesn't need the exporters or importers code, or every goods or every amount that you bought the goods in South Africa, it will need the exporters code as long you are a company. I just want to know that. Let me make an example. If I bought something for 2,000 or 1,500, so will it need all those documents of exporters code and importers code, or there is a certain amount whereby we say we start from here? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Date Tsepo. And the last one from Mematoka.
Thank you, Marina and Marian for the elaborate presentation. Marian, I like the fact that Mary alluded to delays in payments from the suppliers on the other end. From the myriad of methods of payments that you've discussed, you didn't touch on intercompany payment. Is it allowed that if I have a Seshweshwe company and a water bottling company, and then I see that my Seshweshwe account is dry, and now I have to pay for a consignment in Botswana, am I allowed to pay from the water bottling company? The other thing is, if Memarina is, say, maybe we're in the same cooperative, and if I can ask her to pay on my behalf, is this allowed by LRA? Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you very much for those questions. I think, Mayor Renson, we can now take them from Datuma Super. Really, I had more of a recommendation for consideration at high level, even though he also asked, why then do I need an agent? Why can't I do it directly? I don't know if you'd want to touch on that, Mayor. And then specific days for lodgement at Maseru and Maputo border post. That's from Date Tsepo Johane. Any minimum thresholds that are exempted from exporters code requirements, and then Memadokas on intercompany payments. Merenze, would you like to?
Yes, thank you very much, Marina and Bomele Bontate, who have asked the questions. I'd love to start with Ndatema Super and thank him for the recommendation that he has made. And also indicate that the recommendation that he's making is already tackled, I think, by other higher bodies above us as in the revenue administrations. Noting that we have our director from the trade from OBFC in here. The Ministry of Trade is also, as our policymaker in the country, assisting us with handling the issues that seem to be posed by the requirements from SARS. And I'm sure that the Exporters Code is one of the issues that they are dealing with. That the concern that you are raising are also included in their subjects. I think she will also touch on it on her presentation. I noted that she's also going to talk after this. And then to Ndate Johane. The days for the submission of applications to Maseru and Maputo are Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. We are not submitting on either Monday, Sunday, or Saturday. And as I have mentioned, there should also be an appointment due to the COVID that is prevailing currently. We are only making appointments for submission because submissions is going to entail a lot of documentation that has to accompany the application forms, hence why the appointments. On the issue of the minimum amounts for the requirement of the exporters code, let me mention that For the businesses, every transaction is treated as commercial. That means irrespective of the value, they have to be declared formally using the SAD or the declaration forms. And the declaration forms are going to require an exporter's code. And I think I should also reiterate that an exporter's code is only required where the buyer has paid VAT to the supplier. But in the event that the buyer has not paid VAT to the supplier, an exporter's code for the importer is not required. Instead, an exporter's code that would be used for now filling the declaration form would be that of the seller. I think it makes clear. An exporter's code on Lesotho-based businesses is a requirement only where VAT has been paid to the supplier. But it's no more a requirement if VAT is payable at the importing country. That means on the SAD, the export details that would be used are those of the seller. Now, moving to Mematuka's question on the methods of payment. The intercompany payments are acceptable, but for purposes of money laundering, those payments, if they are made, they have to be accompanied with the explanation made on the letterhead of those companies. Say a sister company has paid for the other company that is based elsewhere. It should be stated, and there should also be evidence of the company registrations whereby the relationship between these companies would be indicated. She has also asked whether somebody can pay on my behalf. I'm not sure whether I got that one right, Marina. Can you please help me with that one if you got it?
That's correct. She
Or
did
she
ask
can.
to say if they're a member of an association and one member is able to pay for another for importation of goods.
This member being individuals or companies?
Like individuals. Mema Doka, am I interpreting it right? Is that an individual member or it's a member company, member supplier?
Individual may correct. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Actually, I think I should also allude that only Lesotho-based people are allowed to use the method of payment being the tax invoices. Only Lesotho people are allowed to use the method of payment as in tax invoices. If I have my brother or my sister who is a South African is not allowed to use the method of payment as in tax invoices because, as you can understand, the goods are exported out of South Africa to Lesotho. And the qualifying purchaser in this instance is a foreigner. It's somebody who is based in Lesotho, who is a Mosotho, who is not using South African funds to buy goods and then taking them out to South Africa. The qualifying purchasers are the foreigners, that is Lesotho-based companies or Lesotho citizens are the only ones who qualify to use the tax invoices as the method of payment. If I use Memarina's funds to pay for my supplies, Memarina should be a Mosotho and should have used a Lesotho-based company or bank account to pay for that. Because if Memarina or even me as the buyer, I have used the South African bank account to pay for the supplies on which I paid the VAT, the bank in South Africa has to provide a qualification that I own a South African bank account which I opened in the foreign status. I think it makes it more clearer.
Very well,
Mary,
thank you.
thank you for that acknowledgement, Mimatoka. Clearly, there is a lot of interest and still areas that require clarification or maybe questions on the subject. And unfortunately, we're at 12 noon, which means we've slightly gone above the time we had budgeted for this session. I still see also quite a number of comments and questions in the chat. May I, with your permission, just take one last question, or rather one last hand. And for those that still have questions, please quickly type them into the chat box. We will extract those questions and then send them over to the Lesotho Revenue Authority. Even if they are related to the cross-border toolkit, we will send them through to Mary, and then we can draft some responses and share with participants, because we do not want anyone to leave this session with an unanswered question that could be a deal maker or a game changer in how they do business across the border. With that said, I see one hand, Ntate Lebewana Matsimane, while others type their questions in the chat box, and we promise to extract those questions and provide some responses to them.
And thank you to Mayor Mosase. I wanted to raise two issues. The first one, some of us, we produce in small quantities, and we consider South Africa as almost like the Lesotho market in a way, except that you still have to cross the border to take the finished goods. So at times, maybe we're advertising through social media platforms. Somebody can place an order of an item or two, and the quickest way to deliver is to take things across to Lady Brand, and then you are able to deliver on time. And based on the challenges that have come across at the border, we've requested that we be given an opportunity to clear our own goods, so that, I mean, if I'm taking an item or two to Lady Brand, the cost of the clearing agent is already too heavy, because I want to compete with the South African producer of what I'm doing. And from the LRA point of view, it's like you have to come as a group for us to be trained for that. And to try and mobilize people at times is not that easy. Some people might not even be interested. So I want to make a request, if it's possible, for even one company to be trained. I'm not too sure how long it takes and how much it costs. But to us, it's something very urgent, because our business model is such that we want to deliver on time. So we don't want to accumulate over a week or two to deliver to customers. So that is the first question. The second one is transiting raw materials through South Africa has always been a challenge for us. In this manner, when the goods arrive in South Africa, if they are supposed to transit to Lesotho, we are not given an opportunity to transit them ourselves. So we have to use a courier service. And the reason is that there is no guarantee that the goods will end up in Lesotho. And so to counter that, courier services, they have to put a certain amount of money, I think, as security for the goods. And with that service comes a huge bill, which then ends up affecting even our pricing. I mean, just to take things from Johannesburg to here costs more than bringing these things by air freight from another country out of SACU. So that does not work for us. If you have to break that price down to per item after you produce, it becomes too costly for us. So is there an arrangement that can be made with South Africa, given our geographical position that we are right inside South Africa, that there can be a consideration that there is no other way to bring goods here except through South Africa? And if it comes at that huge bill, it becomes too heavy, especially on small manufacturers. Ke a leboha.
Very much, Dade. Mayor Renson, would you like to tackle that? I'm also picking an issue of costs of logistics for SMEs that are exporting SMEs, and also an issue of how to work around price models that can increase the efficiencies there. That's broader than just LRA. I was just picking those in Dade Lebewana's comments. Would you like to shed some response to these last questions as we close off?
Okay, thank you very much, Mme. On the issue of access to the declaration system, I would like to mention that actually there are other means that one can declare without using the clearing agents, so long that a person or company has registered with us for access to the declaration system. However, it should be noted that prior to being provided access to the system, one has to undergo a certain competency test. That means they have to be conversant with some of the customs jargon in terms of the clearance of goods across the borders. So training has to be provided, and the training is not at any cost. It is at the LRA's interest to have everyone lodge the declarations, provided they have the expertise. He also wanted to know whether they can be trained as an individual company, not that they should come as a group of different companies. Yes, that is possible. For instance, if in their company they have 5 or 6 people that they require training for, it's possible. As such, a requirement has to be made to our relevant office such that they can be offered such a training. And then on the part of the couriers, Marina, I did not get it clearly. Can you please help me with that one?
I think on that one, he was, it's also linked really, but it's about transit of goods through South Africa into Lesotho, and how it then requires couriers to play a role in there, and also how it inflates prices to manage the risks that are related. And this is a process that the supplier cannot do internally for himself.
Okay. I think the role of the couriers in the supply chain came about, if I recall well, sometime last year after the COVID-19 era, when it was introduced, or when it came about in our region, because not everybody was allowed to move across the country. Instead, the traders were requested to rather use the services of the couriers. But that was later revised to allow the people who are in business to now move across the borders to get their products. And if I recall very well, they are only supposed to produce their business documents, the trader's license, and their valid passports and the COVID-19 certificates. But then it is their choice to now say, can I collect these goods individually, or do I still need to use the services of the couriers? I recall that even the hawkers are also allowed currently, even previously on the regulations. Yes, for the previous era, they are also allowed to move. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Memustase, for the interactive session, for the responses, for the presentation. Indeed, as promised, if there are any more questions, please put them in the chat box. I think I'll also include this one on transit of goods through South Africa for Mary to also say something on that, because I know there are sections that would cover something on transit of goods in the cross-border toolkit. We will have this webinar recording posted on our web link, www.satihub.com. And you will be able to also access other videos and presentations from previous webinars, and they're very good resources that you can make a reference to. There's one in particular on that expounds more also even on Incoterms. Please do visit that link. We have some upcoming events. First, on the 24th of August, we have a cross-border trade toolkit webinar for Eswatini. It's a similar session that we're going to hold for Eswatini. On the 25th, we have one that we're holding for Mozambique. And then on the 31st, we have one that we are holding for Malawi. We do have country representatives in every country that we operate in, and Dr. George highlighted those 9 countries earlier. And for me, please let me request if Mary Nailwe can just post our emails. Marina Bizabane, the country representative, I work with Mary Nailwe Matava. We can post our emails there in the chat box for further interactions and inquiries as may be necessary. At this point in time, please, even as I apologize for overshooting our time, when there's still so much to talk about or to discuss, let me introduce Mary Mutbang, who is the Director of Trade within the Ministry of Trade and Industry, Lesotho. She's going to deliver for us some vote of thanks and closing remarks. Mary is the Director of Trade, and she has held several positions in the Lesotho government, working with international trade, trade promotion, business, and trade facilitation areas, as well as trade negotiations covering both trade in goods and trade in services. Ma'am Tabang, let me just welcome you, Mayor, to deliver closing remarks.
Many thanks, Mayor Marina. I just want to thank everyone who was able to join this webinar, and we are really glad that we had reached at some point over 70 participants, which shows the level of interest that Basotho now have in knowing issues pertaining to the cross-border trade. I would also like to thank USAID, Southern Africa Trade and Investment Hub, for their unwavering support, because like Ndate Magora has mentioned, we have walked a long way with them, and we really still are grateful even today that they were able to put this together for our exporters and potential exporters. I would just want to indicate that this has indeed been an eye-opener, I think, for many of us, including us even in government, because in as much as we work, we may not be able to provide all the advice. Now, USA Trade Hub has been able to solicit technical assistance on our behalf, where we have Mary, who has done an elaborate presentation covering a number of issues which I think are quite pertinent and critical for anybody who wants to go into the export market. And we are really grateful for such expertise that has been extended to us. And again, for the LRA to have been part of this session, we have had an outcry. Everybody knows about the exporter-importer code. It has been one of the critical things that we really need to solve, because it's now it's acting as an tariff barrier in one way or another, though it's what South Africa is requiring. And again, I should also mention that there are efforts under SADC, but unfortunately, due to COVID-19, somehow the talks had stalled relating to the simplified trade regimes for SMEs, of which I think is something that we really need to try and see how we get that discussion back on track so that the exporters, especially the small exporters, are not faced with the challenges that they are talking about. Ndate Potlo at the beginning, he also touched upon critical issues, especially the very same challenges in terms of how to navigate and also bring or prepare the documents, which is what I think today's session has tried to address. And where there are still gaps, I'm sure the trade hub is still open so that we can access the same expertise for further clarifications, as Ms. Marina has promised, that whoever still has pending questions, if they have not been answered, they are free to post them on the chat as we are still in the meeting, so that they can then be disseminated to the relevant offices for further clarifications. And what I would really like to impress upon today and implore our exporters is to really take the cross-border trade as one of the areas or the important aspects of doing business, because as far as we recall, even our strategic development papers like the NSDP2 really still stress on export-led growth. So I think we should take advantage of this type of webinars wherever you need further assistance, especially because we still have our development partners like the Trade Hub. They are available to extend a helping hand, as they have indicated. Ndate Makoro at the beginning said they would like to see our exporters tapping into the South African market and also trying to tap on the investment capital and technology out of South Africa. Let's take advantage of all those aspects while the project is still running. So let's try, as we go out, let's hit the ground running and take full advantage of these opportunities that are at our disposal. And on that note, I would like to thank everybody. And for those who have not been able to participate, please, those who are here, you have been given information that you'll be able to access the recording and the previous recording on the Trade Hub's website. Please share them as much as you can. I know most of you are in our social media groups, platforms that we are using. Kindly let's work together and share the information to the rest of those who were not able to participate. I thank you all for participating.
Thank you very much, Mema Mutibang. That brings us right to the end of our session, and thank you very much for giving us close to 20 minutes over the time that we had budgeted for. Everyone, please enjoy the rest of your day and the week ahead.